of joy. Yeah. So, anybody, hi Alberto, good to see you. Anybody have any thoughts or questions from last week? We were discussing the last pillar of generosity and mostly concentrating on sort of mental generosity, the generosity of time, the generosity of support, the generosity, the ways in which we can be generous that have nothing to do with material goods, but have more to do with protection from fear, is how they explain it in the Buddhist text. So any more thoughts on that? I don't know why I ask.
No, I have a question. Well, actually, what I learned is when I give something to someone and then they fight with me and they don't want to accept it and all that, because, and all that, because they have a hard time accepting. I have put, thanks to you, I put the focus back on myself instead of being so concerned with them and their behavior and their reaction. So that I learned to always, keep the focus on me and my intentions and not let it ruin, how I'm feeling, because I do like to give things to people. And
yes, you do.
I had one friend that would never accept a birthday lunch, when I wanted to pay for a birthday lunch, because she said, well, then I'll just have to do it for you. And it was so insane. That wasn't what I wanted, so I have to put it back on me and not be concerned about other people.
We're not trying to change them. Yeah.
Yes.
Trying to accept where we are, where we, that's a key to our peace of mind, is always acting from our inner wisdom, our inner care, our inner kindness, not with the expectation of the other person reacting the way we want them to. that is how we suffer. That's just creating a condition for suffering, to do things with a goal of getting something from someone else. And we really suffer greatly from that. So if we can just keep coming back to what, why we do things, what our intention, we can even correct our intention if we realize, ooh, I really did have sort of a motive here that I might not be being honest about, and clean that up a little bit, So it's the more we can focus on what we really do have some influence over, which is our own minds, our own speech, our own actions of body, and then we become a condition of no harm to others. And that's how we provide protection from fear.
Well, for me, it was all about letting go of the other person's reaction. And not getting into having to explain, well, it's because, I wanted to give this to you, and getting into that altercation when they were so...
and you're also making up a story that's not needed.
Yeah, exactly. So I appreciate that. I learned something like that. That's good. Thank you.
Thank you, Marianne. And in a way, it's funny because when we do that, when we take good care of not creating stories about others, but really just looking within to see, where we're coming from, that protects us. When we know that we're acting, that we're trying at least to act from a good place, with a place of doing no harm, with a place that's not self-centered, that doesn't look at everything from just the perspective of, what you want, or what you need, or what you think you need, or all those things, then you don't have regrets about your part of interactions. You know, you can have sadness because interactions don't go well. You know, you can have, you know, it's not that this protects you from the experience of what happens in the world. It just protects us from that regret of knowing that we've done harm, that we've said something that really was unkind or mean, or we've, judged people harshly. We've assumed we know, all the different ways that we influence our speech and our behavior that are really stories we're making up, as opposed to just coming from a genuine place within. So being able to increase our awareness and being able to pause, to be able to really think about anything before we act. Did you get your haircut, Tally? I like it.
Thank you. Yes. During this pandemic, I've been cutting my own hair, much to the horror of my family, but yes. Thank you.
All right, I want to. Where is it? Okay, so just to remind us of what can help us. I mean, this can be very helpful during the pandemic. This remembering perspective and humility and humor and acceptance and forgiveness and gratitude and compassion and generosity. That if we come from this kind of place where we're able to step back from difficult situations, difficult interactions, frustration with the circumstances we're in, that can remind us that, what are the different ways that we talk about that, how perspective helps? What do we do when we say perspective? How do we approach that? What are the ways we can think about that? How about the fact that we're one of 7 billion people? And surely we're not the only ones struggling in this particular moment, so that we can kind of reduce that sense of just, me. This is happening to me, as if it's only happening to me. That just inflates our concerns about everything. Robert, were you going to add?
No, so are you asking what perspective from our, or how do we see it from everyone's different point of view?
Well, I'm just saying, how do we use perspective? What is the word? How does perspective help us? So one way is that stepping back, being able to understand that you know, this is one moment of difficulty or however, whatever it is, that we don't want to exaggerate, you know, the event.
It's looking at things in a different way, changing your mind.
Well, that's another way, you know, like Robert was saying, you know, that we look at it from different points of view. So one thing we do with perspective is, you know, try to look at things from the perspective of all the people involved, if there are people involved, you know, and you're not just looking at your, you know, bank account.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're looking at your bank account, then you can look at the perspective just in general, that, you know, I'm not the only one whose bank account is low. And, you know, try to remember all the ways in which you have resources, so that you don't come from everything from an attitude of scarcity or depletion, that you can remember that, you know, this isn't the only thing that defines what's going on with your life.
So what about perspective and using all the rest of the pillars, like looking at it in a perspective of humility, looking at it in perspective of humor, acceptance, forgiveness, gratitude, compassion, generosity.
That's exactly what we need to do. Is, you know, is to take any situation that we're struggling with and do all these things till it becomes habitual. So that we, you know, kind of always kind of step back in our minds. Take a deep breath, if that's if that's sort of the mindfulness technique you have to, you know, to remember, you know, perspective, remember humility, remember that, you know, and to be able to laugh at ourselves in the situations that we're in, you know, that it's just, you know, like, and mostly this is helpful when we're really kind of hooked by our self-centered attitude, you know, and we want, you know, it's like you know, that if you really looked at it in the extreme, you take a thought that you have and you look at it, you know, you expand it out and think, okay, so what I'm saying is I don't care about anybody else. I just want this right now the way I want it, just for a moment. I would just like things to be perfect for this moment, you know, so that, you know, we want to look at it when we're kind of doing that in our heads and making things, you know, having an experience that's far worse than it needs to be, because our attitude is just demanding something that's totally unrealistic. And so that's why acceptance is important. Acceptance of how things are. And then forgiveness of self and others. That, you know, we make mistakes, we're not perfect, we're not, you know, all of the different ways that not only are we not perfect, but, you know, all those corporations out there aren't perfect, because they're made up of people, you know, that all the problems that, you know, man-made problems that we experience in the, you know, in the world, you know, to have some forgiveness towards the people who made decisions at times when they didn't have all the information, they didn't know what would happen. I think about, there was a period of time when farmers decided to kill all that, you know, the moss or the algae that sometimes grows at the roots of trees. So for a while there, they thought that you needed to get rid of that. You know, if you wanted the tree to really bear fruit and grow big and whatever, you know, you needed to get rid of that, only to find out that's what feeds the roots of the trees. But they didn't know that at the time. So they did a lot of harm in, you know, in the process of learning that, you know, not a good plan. And many of the problems we have in the world are like that. They have roots in people not really understanding the big picture, either because we don't know the big picture or because they're not thinking of the big picture. So acceptance of that reality. What does acceptance not mean? Just, I always have to throw this in for fear that people miss this point.
Accepting
Like
maybe a
settling?
terrible predicament or abuse from other people.
Okay, I heard part of your sentence.
Yeah, I think so. Acceptance doesn't mean, accepting things that you do have the power to change. So, for example, if you are in an abusive relationship, or if you are being unfairly accused of something at work, you can speak up and try to correct the situation. You don't have to accept.
Well, you
that
still have
and
to
give up.
accept what
Doesn't mean
is.
giving up. Yeah, it doesn't mean, I guess, giving up or giving in.
Right, or agreeing.
Agreeing, yeah.
It doesn't mean agreeing. It just means, and it doesn't mean being passive. Acceptance is this ability to see what is and not create suffering in the mind by going, it shouldn't be like that. Well, it is like that. We create a lot of suffering through our resistance to what is. Our resistance to the person who will never let us take them out for a birthday lunch. We want to really be able to, see that resistance as a source of our own suffering. And obviously it's a source of others if we're pushing it on others. And forgiveness, if we want to look at the big forgiveness, is things like the Truth and Reconciliation Councils, where people acknowledge the great harms they did during wars, etc. And the people who were harmed forgive. So that the community can move forward. And then gratitude. This is, remembering in any, that we have resources, and those resources, it's something to rejoice in, whether those resources are supportive people in our lives, whether it's that we live in safe neighborhoods, whether it's, whatever our resources are, to recognize that we have more than just this moment of interaction or difficult circumstance. We have things to draw from. And that some of that where we can draw from is our inner wisdom, our inner resources. And, so some of that is, being able to recognize, I've had difficult times before, I've made it through. And compassion for ourselves and others, that we suffer. And it's a drag. We wish to be free of it. And we behave badly sometimes from our suffering. And then that's, part of the generosity of spirit. So try to, right now, just think about one situation that you have difficulty with, and try to look at it from these 8 things. So bring it to mind. And try to see it from a different perspective, whether it's just from, like the worldview perspective, or the perspective of the others involved. if you have this book, the Book of Joy, at the end, it has, you know, these pillars and a little meditation about it, although, you know, until you're skilled at it, it takes a while. So you may not do all the steps. So another way you can look at it from perspective is the perspective of time. Will this be a big deal 6 months from now, 5 years from now? Humility. This again is remembering you're just one of 7 billion people, not to mention all the animals and fish and insects and all struggling to survive, all struggling to be free of suffering. And we're interdependent, interconnected. So we don't want our situation, our circumstances to justify our taking it out on others. We don't want our suffering to become harm for someone else.
Tendron?
Yes.
So I have something I want to ask you. So sometimes having compassion for others brings on more suffering for me.
Yeah, you know, it is not necessarily pleasant to feel someone else's suffering, to be aware of their suffering. So what do you mean that it causes, you know, so what's your point?
So the point, I guess the point I'm thinking about is like even during the meditation when we were, you know, having, you know, compassion for all the people suffering in the world and, you know, you're going through all the different people you bring to mind. And then I just thought about the heaviness in my heart that it would really cause me more like suffering, thinking about all the suffering. And so that, you know, I have to work on compassion for myself in
and also
in feeling
acceptance.
compassion.
Well, but also the acceptance that this is the world.
Yeah.
You know, it's like not all about whether Francesca feels good at this moment. You know,
that.
it's really about, this is the mess we're in.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're Buddhist, this can help you develop renunciation to really understand that happiness is not out there in samsara.
Right. So happiness is not always void of suffering. Suffering is part of happiness.
I didn't say that. But suffering's part of samsara.
Samsara, right.
Cyclic existence is the nature of suffering, and we can see it in every moment of the day.
Right. Right.
But we don't have to choose despair, because despair doesn't help. And you're not alone in this experience of samsara's suffering.
Right.
You know, we have to really keep our focus on, you know, it's more like when we recognize, wow, I'm suffering now, just thinking about all the suffering, you know, is that truth of suffering? What the Buddha taught. There's a truth of suffering. And there's a truth of the causes of suffering. And the causes of suffering are our actions of body, speech, and mind. So we want to respond to suffering with compassion, not despair, because despair doesn't do anything. It's really like, you know, it's like a condition for self-pity mind. Oh, can't the world just be better than this? Or I don't want to think about it. I mean, yeah, we have to, you know, we don't want to sit there and watch the news 24 hours a day. Why do we even have news channels that are 24 hours a day? You know?
Very true. because that just brings on more, despair.
Well, and it's not, we need to know what's going on, but you can also take news breaks, and go, I know the world's a mess. I don't need to watch it on TV. But if we just ignore it, that's different from, keeping this perspective. Okay, my suffering is minor if I look at all the suffering that exists. I can't fix it all. We need humility. We need to understand and accept our limitations. We don't need to feel sorry for ourselves. That's not the same as compassion. Yes, Robert.
Isn't there a slight danger when you try and see from another person's perspective, which I think we should do, but that we also start telling ourselves a story or what
Yes, we want to make sure we understand that we're guessing. But we also want to recognize we're not the only player in the scenario, and we tend to already judge others. So we just want to interrupt that judgment of others to really trying to be in their shoes for a moment in order to be able to have compassion or whatever's appropriate in that time for this person. And also to come up with, if it's something that might have some problem solving component to it, that, we need to kind of keep in mind, I'm not the only one here. Maybe they see this from, and then opens us up to hearing others' perspectives. And then we even have to accept that none of us, nobody involved, has the correct perception. That we will see it different ways because of everything we bring to it. All our habits of mind, our experiences in this life. And so that's where we want to be also bring in our humor. If we want to really think a little more lightheartedly about, and also just, the humor that comes from recognizing that, well, if I make that's going to help, where we create our own suffering and we kind of realize that, okay, I'm making this worse. Just being able to chuckle about that. Like the way we chuckle when we see children do something that really isn't helping their situation at all. But we know that it'll pass, those moments will pass, and they'll figure it out. We need to feel that way about ourselves and our own difficulties in our own learning process and other people's. And some of our habits appear again and again and again, don't they? And it's just like, oh, there I go again. It's like remote control. Did someone push my button? So just, it's about, being able to step back for a moment, catch our breath, and not act on that urge that's coming from a habit that isn't helpful. We have lots of unskillful habits. And humor can help us stop in a moment, just sort of like, okay, I'm going to start over now. So do you see how you can, I mean, if you take it one situation, so you can practice this at home, you're all at home, but you can, where you take a situation, you can write it down. Sometimes it helps to just, kind of write it down, okay, what are the different ways I could look at this? What are my limitations? How can humility influence the way I look at this? Especially circumstances or conversations or situations that seem to repeat themselves a lot in your life. Pick one and, go through with these different attitudes to see if you can find out, where you're tripping yourself up and contributing to your own suffering. Maybe it's just a lack of acceptance of your limitations and the world's limitations. Maybe it's this, you're still hanging tightly, to some expectation. It shouldn't be like this. I know I used to do that when I would go visit my family over holidays. I really wanted, to show up sometime and have a good family experience. Well, it was ridiculous. When I think back on it, it's like, well, that's fair. That's going to work, And as soon as you let go of that, it's amazing how many nice things happen on a visit if you're not clinging to the Hallmark card version. Or clinging to your own, that it's all about you. Being grateful for the resources you do have instead of focusing on the resources you do not have. Also understanding that all the resources in the world do not fix our mind. It's not that rich people don't have suffering. Doesn't mean that people who have someone to do everything for them don't suffer. But the more we can develop our inner resources, our ability to stay peaceful, no matter what's going on, knowing that these moments are impermanent. It's like, after all these months with this pandemic, I'm sure attitudes have affected how we've, adapted to it. Have we adapted? Are we still sitting here just waiting for it to be over? Or have we gotten on, what do you call it? I just lost that phrase. We've gone on with it. Was. I'm really losing the ability to speak. I can't think of it. Now I'm just completely blank. All right. I'm having a senior moment much too soon.
Gotten on with their lives.
Yes, thank you. With their lives. You get on.
From the eldest senior here.
Yes, thank you very much. Because it's just sort of like, okay, I just do things differently, but my life still continues. I'm not waiting. Now, there's no question, when we don't have a pandemic to be concerned about, it makes things easier from moment to moment. You get to hug people, that's nice, all this stuff. But life's full of these kinds of things. Think about the last time you were in a hurricane where it did damage to your house or you didn't have power, So we want to be able to to come from a place of just, okay, this is what is right now. It will change. It may never change in the way that it was yesterday. In fact, it cannot. But if we just handle what is, you know, that's all we can do. That's our limitation isn't to be able to change the future or change the past. We just have the present to deal with. And the more we can deal with the present with a calm, contented mind, the more wisdom can prevail. And love and compassion. You know, it's so, you know, in our society, we have a tendency to divide those kinds of states. You know, we divide wisdom from compassion as if they are completely different types of minds. And they are different minds. But it's not that compassion is less correct than the realization of emptiness. You know? Those are both, they're uncontaminated minds. Wisdom, love, compassion, generosity, patience, all of those are correct states of mind. Whereas anger and attachment, jealousy, those are exaggerated states that are not correct. Does that make sense? I ring a bell. So we want to remember that. We want to remember that it's not, that it's emotional to have compassion arise, you know, or of affection arise, you know, that this desire to get along with each other, this desire to not cause harm, these are not like emotional states. They actually make sense. They are reasonable. It is reasonable when we see someone suffering to wish them to be free of that. It is reasonable to provide help when we can. It is reasonable to have compassion for a person, even if the behavior is not acceptable. We need to stop behavior that's harmful, but we don't have to do it from a place of hatred. That actually makes no sense. Hatred doesn't help. So according to Buddhism, skillful states of mind, positive states of mind, are minds that create the cause of happiness and are not the cause of suffering. Joy?
Oh, no.
Thoughts?
Sometimes it's very difficult to forgive somebody. I find that it's causing me a lot of pain, that part, that I need to forgive and not to judge. It comes out of a place of a lot of pain in my heart. So I've been trying to work on that too.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the challenges, isn't it? It's, and of course, forgiveness, you know, it has to arise, you know, genuinely, or it's just not there. We can fake it, but it won't be there. The experience of, you know, of no longer clinging to the hurt, you know, comes from within, and that can take time. And so much of the time we have to really be able to get very precise, you know, about, have I forgiven myself for my part in this situation? You know, because we kind of, you know, in order to forgive someone else, we also need to recognize that perhaps we haven't forgiven ourselves. That part of that, you know, that dynamic is going on. Alberto?
In my mind, you have to accept that you cannot be perfect and always have the perspective of others, always have humility, always have
That's right.
maybe a little more gratitude. Yeah, not that easy to forget, but if you want to have joy, you have to accept that of yourself. And as long as you have them in mind, or the right state of mind, that the list that you showed us, I think that that it will help you. Otherwise, you beat yourself as I'm not as generous as I should be, and no, it doesn't help.
No. Yeah, that's so true. You know, it's not, we, you know, we need to keep these things in mind for every decision we make and everything we say and we do. You know?
Are some of the well wishes an oxymoron to the acceptance?
No, they're not the same thing. Acceptance is of what is. Wishes are for what you want for them.
Thank you.
Yeah. So the idea is that if we can connect with people or animals, you know, beings that can suffer, you know, if we can connect with that sharedness, we have, you know, that's something we all share. We're all vulnerable to being hurt, whether it's mental or physical, you know? And so that understanding that everybody we're interacting with has this vulnerability. And what do? We try to protect that vulnerability. And some of our methods for protecting our vulnerability are not skillful. They don't work. They harm others. We protect our vulnerability by, you know, trying to, you know, defend ourselves from everybody else, and that can cause harm. So if instead we can connect with that sameness, that we're all vulnerable in the same way, and have that ability, you know, really cultivate that ability to feel compassionate for ourselves and others. This is what the Truth with Suffering is about. It's recognizing that we all suffer and that nothing external is going to just fix that. You know, you can have the best doctors, the best care, the best food, all the things you need for good health, and get sick. We're vulnerable that way. And so is everybody else. And we don't like it, do we? It's not the most comfortable feeling of knowing that you can do everything right and drop dead this moment. That we're vulnerable that way. And not only that, every moment of our lives gets us closer to death. We're all vulnerable to that. We don't know when it's going to happen. You know? We also, you know, we get hurt through words. We get hurt by others' actions. We have a lot of mental vulnerability. And we share that with everyone. So if we can come from a place that accepts this reality, that has, you know, humility, that we don't have all the answers for ourselves, much less anybody else, that we're going to make mistakes, so we can have a sense of humor about it. Others are going to make mistakes. That not only do we make small mistakes, we make big ones. And most people around us have done the same. They're hanging out with enlightened beings. They might not do so many. Most of us are doing it. So, but we can, my doorbell's ringing. We can, it's really hard to ignore a doorbell. If you never get a doorbell, it's a really, I think this is the second one in 6 months. Okay, but we want to have a soft spot. The more we can not take our soft spot, that soft spot in our gut or our heart, wherever you feel that spot when when a child, runs delightedly towards you and you're just like, oh, there's just a joy there. Or when you see someone suffering and there's just that, there's just that tenderness that's kind of like, oh, you're so sad for them, that soft spot, we tend to put like a cast iron pot over, in most of our interactions to try to protect ourselves. And it's exactly the wrong thing to do. We want to get rid of that fortress we build around our soft spot and come from that place so that we are gentle and take more care and have love and compassion and understanding and acceptance without expectation that others will be different somehow. But just like our experience of being hurt or affected by a small child, is somehow different. The more we can come from this soft spot, our interactions with everybody will have a different quality. They'll, the more we can connect with others on that human level or living being level, then we reduce our suffering just by I don't know, to me, it's like we overcome our resistance to the suffering of samsara, the acceptance of the suffering of samsara, this acceptance of the imperfection of living beings, the acceptance of our vulnerability, that the people we love will break our hearts from time to time, that we will say something incredibly unskillful to someone and hurt their feelings from time to time. And isn't it wonderful that we care about each other enough that we can be wounded that way? That's part of our connection. It's like when we grieve the loss of someone. Wouldn't you rather have the loss to grieve than no feelings about it at all? I had a package delivered. I just got a text. Now I know what the doorbell was. So we all get easily distracted. This is what, but this soft spot, the more we can stay open to our shared living beingness without becoming somehow more self-grasping, really understanding that there's not so much separateness between us, that we're interdependent, and we're part of that interdependence. Am I making any sense, or am I just giving a Hallmark pep talk? It's scary though, isn't it? It's scary that we're vulnerable. But this is where we have to keep in mind that soft spot, that everybody's that way. And we want to know that so that we will take care. It helps support our desire to do no harm. Because if we don't recognize each other's vulnerability, then this do no harm doesn't have much meaning. Yeah, we know we're not going to murder someone, you know, but are we careful with our speech? It doesn't mean we'll be perfect at it. It just means that we, you know, the more we can come from this inner, you know, soft spot. Because it's not about just, you know, it doesn't lay us open to being more vulnerable. The reality is we get hurt anyway. Whether we're well defended, we have that cast iron pot, or not. We either get wounded through loneliness because we don't let anybody in. Yeah, Ralph.
You'd used a word earlier that had a lot of impact on despair. And what I noticed is that any one of these pillars, as it's being called, can be used as a gateway or as an entrance to the relief of despair.
Yeah.
Because I was going to ask, you know, how do you pick yourself up off the floor from that despair? And so I just want to share that. Thanks.
So was that a question in there?
No, I think I answered my own question, which was, you know, dealing with despair. So I just want to mention that. Thank you for that.
No, not me. So this is, you know, yeah, this is the thing, is that, and we need to practice these in order to have them available when we need it. That's the purpose of sitting in meditation or sitting quietly at your kitchen table and taking a scenario in your head that you experience and working it out, seeing how it could go differently. So that when you're in the thick of it, you have a little space because you have some tools to work with. You know, and the more you practice them, the more they just arise naturally because they too become habits. So the ability to put things in perspective.
Tendron. So recently I had a situation and I was having a hard time working through it, you know, in perspective with all, you know, with all my understanding of what I've learned so far. And I had to, because I was in such a thick of everything, I had to figure out a way to do a visualization that I could come from a place of almost just visualizing I was pure light and pure love and nothing else at the moment, because I could not, you know, work through these intellectually. You know, I could not figure out a way to get myself past the hurt and the despair and the anger and all
like
the.
You figured out a way,
and it worked. So I don't know.
You figured out a way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It just
and now
like,
I can look at it this way. Now I'm at the point where I've calmed down enough, and I'm able to intellectually work through these pillars.
But it's not just intellect, is it? It's heartfelt. That's what I'm saying, that the West separates these things. Buddhism says compassion, love, kindness, generosity, these are wise. These naturally arise out of wisdom. So you don't, it's not an intellectual, it's, you know, this idea of, it's not a separate process. It's all part of the same thing. So yes, we have to use our ability to reason when we're looking at, you know, like an exercise.
Reason, yes.
But we also need to generate the experience, this heartfelt experience, in order to, you know, become accustomed to that.
Yeah.
It's not separate. And it sounds like, you say, well, because I couldn't work through this. You found a solution. It just wasn't one of words.
Right. It was just pure, just sort of just coming at it from
You're
one
coming
particular.
from your soft spot.
Mm-hmm.
Because let's face it, most of the time we really don't understand each other because we think differently, we bring in different experiences, we're bringing a different history, so this idea that we can just really understand this other person, or this situation, how did this happen, it's, it has it has value, but there's a limit to it. But if we start at the basics, that everybody wants to be free from suffering, everybody wants to be happy, everybody's vulnerable, then it's like we don't have to have the precision of the story. We're trying to connect that living being level.
Yeah, I'll get better at it next time, because I went through that, and I can just say that, having worked through that particular situation and seeing that things are going to change. That's a big one, knowing that, you're going through something at the moment and it will change. And like you said, it will never be like it was, but it's going to change. And, understanding all those things, especially after it's over and you finally accepted it and you released all the anger and pain and all that. And, it's just so refreshing to then really, put these concepts into practice, when you're at the point that you can finally, let go. And I think acceptance is a big one.
Yep.
But it's just, it's just practice. I think it's just next time I have something come up, it'll get easier.
And it's also good to practice before the fact.
Yes.
Just imagine these situations, imagine them going differently. Imagine the way they have gone, and then imagine using tools to respond differently. So, and we'll get hooked again, but practice makes it less often. But we're not Buddhas. We're not out of samsara. So, but slowly, as we change these habits of mind, we get kinder, we become more wise, we'll become more compassionate, we'll have less regret. And that is an unbelievable blessing, just to have less regret, where you don't feel like, you're a jerk every day of your life, or every hour or every minute, depending on your degree of jerkness. I was a big jerk, so I have a lot of room for improvement. But so it's not that we just accept ourselves the way we are and then go, I can't do anything to change how I am, because that's not true.
I paused a lot this time, more so than maybe I would have reacted more in the past when the situation came up. So I couldn't go back and say, I regret saying this, I regret saying, at least I did that. I didn't have to go back and regret.
And so this is the point. So then, this is what reflecting after the fact can do for us, is we can rejoice over the things that, that we go, I see progress here. And then, and try, because we want to replicate the experience. This is where the experimentation scientist approach is, we want to replicate good results. And the good results is that no regret within you. It's not about getting something from someone else or from the circumstances. It's about developing our confidence that, we can respond to things in new ways that might reduce suffering. And of course, all of these pillars, the more we can recognize when our self-centered perspective is taking over, you know, and the more we can, that's part of the purpose of looking at perspective, all these things is, you know, trying to, you know, step back and being able to see it from more than just our self-centered needs, wants, desires. You know, so we have to constantly be working on undermining this idea we have that getting what we want leads to happiness. Because it doesn't. It can lead to temporary, very temporary sensory delights, but even those don't last long. You know, it's like almost from the time you order something from Amazon to the time it arrives, you know, there's something else you want. You're over it already. It hadn't even gotten there. You know, we're really funny about these things, that these ideas we have that, you know, that I'll be happy when, and whatever that when is. So we want to be aware of that aspect, you know, to just keep looking, okay, where am I in this picture? What is my interest in this? What is my, you know, so that we can keep trying to let go more of that perspective, because it's an obstacle. Because it's sort of like, you know, how when we talk about, the Buddha said that, you know, in order to listen to teachings, you don't want to be like a, you know, an upside down pot or a leaky pot or a contaminated pot. Our self-grasping is that upside down pot. Nothing gets in because, you know, because we've assumed that we're correct, that getting what we want will make us happy. And so we have to, you know, flip that pot so that we can consider other perspectives, other things, understanding that, you know, that's not where the cause of happiness lies, is just getting what you want. So we have to recognize when we're being driven by that false belief. And that comes with just, you know, really looking for, you know, where is myself in this picture? Where is my self-centered, you know, interest? How can I let go of that more? Can I look at this from a, you know, a distance? How we doing? I really like Dawn and Kermit Frog. Isn't that Kermit?
I have a question.
Yes, Marianne.
If through some of these difficult people we deal with throughout our lives, we see them as our teachers, and we practice patience, this, that, and the next thing. And if we didn't have them in our life, how would we be able to, learn these lessons and work on ourselves? However, I had an appointment yesterday with a client, a new client, and she was telling me that as she's getting older in life, or just it finally dawned on her that she doesn't want to deal with anybody that she doesn't resonate with, that she
What's
doesn't.
the question?
Well, the question is that a good thing? I mean, she just doesn't want the stress of dealing with people that she,
Guess what? She's
that are
going to
difficult.
die and be reborn and deal with us all again.
So what are you saying? That we need to throw ourselves into the pit of fire with a lot of these people? Or is it okay to walk away from people that we really just, find an agitation? I'm really unclear about that.
It depends. It's a good thing in the beginning to really guard our minds with circumstances that we have some control over. Just like the addict who doesn't hang out with his other addict friends, when they're trying to get clean.
Yeah.
It's the same way, but just, so it's like we stretch ourselves when we can, but if a certain condition just, we just lose it every time, then we've stretched too far. But if we just think, if we just think going to the cave and meditating and keep, and having those lovely fruits and berries and mango trees outside the opening of the cave, so we have all the food we need and we don't, just not dealing with people at all is somehow going to make us happier. It won't. We have to work with our dissatisfied mind. And that has nothing to do with external circumstances. External circumstances are conditions, but we can respond to conditions. How we respond to conditions is what determines whether or not our experience of this is suffering or not. And it's hard for us to believe that, isn't it? Peggy, did you want to say something?
Yes. Through the Buddha's teachings and practicing the 8 pillars of joy, everyone has these difficult people that might push their buttons, and we probably push theirs too. So just the setting yourself up before you're going to have a meeting or a conversation, and just doing a 30-second meditation on it of what you want the outcome to be.
What is that outcome?
Really a peaceful exchange is the most important to me, that someone might feel like I don't have to agree with what they're saying, but I can listen.
So it's you responding peacefully, not the other person.
I can't do anything about that.
Right.
No, it's about me walking into the pit of fire, knowing that I've got some tools, and that just takes practice.
Yeah.
And certainly haven't perfected it, but
that's the thing, isn't it? It's the practice. It becomes easier with practice, and that's why you can stretch yourself. You don't. It's like if you have the, that person, that relative. Let's be predictable. That relative that just. We just really hate spending time with them. And they're going to be there, at the family gathering. And this year you've had a whole year off practically, from these people, oh, yay, The point is that you don't go out to lunch every week with this relative, and put your, like you said, jump into the fire. First, you work with, like Peggy's saying, you try to prepare your mind in advance. So you pause before you even get into the situation to remember, okay, I would like to not get hooked by this person, not to let my big dissatisfaction button be pressed, and be able to accept this person, whatever they're going to be like that day, as they are. And me act from a place of, peace, loving kindness. Instead of just spending our time in our minds going, this person would just shut up. Just trust me. First of all, odds are good that you're that person for someone else. That's where humility comes in. This recognition that, I'm sorry, you think everybody's happy to see you? It's just, we really want to have that perspective of remembering that our difficult people have friends who don't find them difficult and would probably find us difficult. It's not to hate, to generate self-hatred. It's just really understanding that preference, you know, has everything to do with our own perspective and not the reality of the person. The truth is, it's not that there is a difficult person. There is a person you find difficult. Just like friends, enemies, strangers. There are strangers, but they're not strangers to the whole world. They are friends of others. They're enemies of others. And so we really you might want to work on this habit we have of labeling people as difficult. Instead, recognize, oh, this is, you know, I become difficult when I'm around this person. My mind is a mess when I'm around this person, and that's me. So how can I work with that? One is to avoid that person. You know, that's a strategy. What if you can't avoid that person? Oh, well, maybe, you know, you want to try to picture it going differently. How can you work with your mind, you know, when you're around people that don't suit you? We all have that. We all have coworkers, or, you know, I mean, they're all, you know, we don't like everybody. No big deal. And it is good to use a situation like Marianne's talking about, where you meet someone you think, and you understand, they tell you what their strategy of life is, and it's useful to think, wow, would that work? You don't have that conversation with them, but for you to be able to take what you understand, you know, to help it be a scenario for your inner wisdom to develop and recognize the pitfalls and the, you know, advantages. This is what we do. We look at the disadvantages of staying the same, the advantages of changing, you know, and then we, you know, try to follow up with choosing those things we want to change. Do y'all want to say hello to each other?
Hello.
But where's our fearless leader?
Hello. Hello.
Nicole, would you put
Hello,
people
everybody.
in just little groups of 5 people or something, and I'm going to go get my package.